You Ought to Write a Book. Presented to New Wilmington Thursday Club Getting to Know You series, May 15, 2008. With thanks, Mary Ann Harms. My kids would often tell me, "Mom, you ought to write a book." So after pondering their requests, I began to realize that our family has had many exciting and wonderful experiences, enough to fill a book. Many thanks go to my conservative Christian parents, my 1 in a million husband of 53 years, and my 5 wonderful kids, in-laws, and 17 enthusiastic grandkids. Without them, life would be quite uneventful. A big hug and love to son Dwayne, who put scripted pictures together for this book presentation, and daughter Danette for the cover art. Chapter 1. Born, Moved, Educated, Loved, Jailed. Memories. Henderson, Nebraska. On Friday, March 13, 1934, in the home of Peter Wall and wife Elizabeth, the 6th member of their family arrived. The baby girl was named Mary Ann, after one of Peter's sisters. I was that baby. My oldest brother, Ben, 20, was in college, and my brother Irvin, 18, was to start college in the fall. He was so sure that with added expenses of a baby, he wouldn't be able to get a college education. He was very unhappy with my parents, so he wouldn't come see me for many weeks. By the way, he ended up being my favorite brother. Many years later, one of my friends, hearing about Irvin not wanting to see me, said that I must have been a geranium. Puzzled, I asked why. The answer, "You must have grown from a slip." My brother John, 15, sister Helena, 12, and brother Edwin were glad to have a geranium for a sister. Now I can understand why the unhappiness. Mom and Dad had lived in Canada during the Depression and had lost their farm. They moved back to Henderson to try to start all over again. My first memory, my cat died, Mom put it into a box, and Dad buried the box in the backyard while I sang, "Jesus loves me, this I know." Another memory, our neighbor lady baked delicious bread. I'd go to her door and say in German, "Can I have something to eat?" And she'd give me fresh bread with lots of jelly. Does overweight start at age 2? Relatives in Dallas, Oregon encouraged my folks to move to Dallas. So when I was 3, the family, minus Irvin, who was in college in spite of my birth, and Ben, now married, moved to Dallas. They arrived with $3 in their pockets. For that first summer, we lived in a tent at a camp for those picking hops. Now, my Mennonite parents did not believe in drinking beer, so all the hops they picked were used for yeast. I took my naps in a wooden hop basket. In the fall, the family moved into an unfinished house owned by an uncle, rented for $3 a month. To survive, my mom sold home-baked rolls, and my dad and brothers worked in the apple sheds and cut wood. In 2 years, the family made enough money to buy 10 acres of farmland for $500, with only $50 down. The farm had a barn, a chicken coop, and several acres of prune trees, which I helped pick. We lived in the barn until Dad built a house which was never finished. No running water, just a well. No inside bath, and only 2x4s and some curtains for walls. Do you remember this machine? It certainly is one of my first memories. I was 4 when I got my first perm. I thought I'd be executed, but I did have curly hair, which I loved. When I was in 3rd grade, we moved to West Salem, first to the outskirts of town, across the highway from the Willamette River. I learned what damage a flood could do. We owned a few geese. I learned that geese can really bite hard. Later, my folks bought a completely furnished house in town. I thought I was in heaven. We had running water, an inside bathroom, a real refrigerator, an electric stove, and beautiful furniture. I had neighbor kids to play with, and my first bicycle. The school was a block away, and the church practically in our backyard. I took piano lessons, then switched to violin lessons in the 5th grade when I was 10. I loved playing violin and quickly went from class lessons to private lessons. Recitals were fun. In the summers, I would practice 5 to 7 hours a day and win the prize for practicing the most. Well, we lived in that dream house 4 years. Then my folks bought a dairy farm east of Salem. It was here as a 9th grader that I was concert mistress in a large orchestra. I went to Salem High my sophomore year and was the leader of the 2nd violin section. I really enjoyed orchestra, but couldn't go to extracurricular activities because my Mennonite upbringing frowned on dancing, movies, and so forth. So I transferred to Salem Bible Academy for my junior and senior years. There wasn't an orchestra, but I played a lot of solos and also obligatos with the choir. I sang in the choir and other smaller groups. I enjoyed the religious classes and other courses. I ended up being valedictorian, but before you think that was a great achievement, I must tell you there were only 42 students in my class. It was during my senior year that my parents moved back to Dallas. My mom worked in the Blue Lake Cannery. I also worked in the cannery in the summer of my junior and senior high school years. I wanted to attend Tabor College, a small Mennonite college in Hillsboro, Kansas, and I knew I would need more money than the academic scholarship I received from Tabor. I wanted to be a home ec teacher, but after the first semester in general chemistry, where I got a C, I changed my major to elementary education. It was at Tabor that I started dating and met sophomore Clarence Harms from Ulysses, Kansas. We were in several classes together and in the choir, which did a lot of traveling, including a trip to California. By February, we had our first real date, going to a men's dorm social. We went to many plays and socials. By the way, I made my formals. We sang in concerts and had lots and lots of long talks. In the summer after my freshman year, I went back to Dallas to work in the cannery. Clarence had a job with the wheat harvesting crew. College classes started again in the fall. By November, Clarence had written my parents without my knowledge, asking permission to marry me. On December 6th, he proposed, and of course I was thrilled and said yes. Maybe it was yippee yippee or something like that. Anyway, he went back to his dorm. The guys found out we were engaged, got a wheelbarrow, put Clarence in it, and came to my dorm to pick me up for a ride down Main Street. The local policeman heard all the noise and put Clarence and me in the small local jail. We were released 10 minutes later. What a way to celebrate an engagement. Classes continued second semester. I was finishing my sophomore year, Clarence's junior year. I earned a 60-hour teaching certificate, which meant I could only teach for 2 years. In February, I signed a contract to teach at Finch School, a small country school with 7 students. My salary for 8 months of teaching was $2,200. At the end of the college year, I went back home to Dallas to work at the Blue Lake Cannery and make wedding plans. Clarence went back to Ulysses to follow the wheat harvest. The end of July, he bought our first car. On August 5th, he, his mother, and 2 of our college roommates headed for Dallas, Oregon. Chapter 2. 2 plus 5 equals happy chaos. We were married in the Dallas Mennonite Brethren Church on August 10, 1954. The next day, we packed up the car with the wedding gifts and headed for Kansas, honeymooning across several states and British Columbia. Some highlights included a cobra garden, an aquarium. Can you tell Clarence was a biology major? Yellowstone and Rocky Mountain National Parks, and the Grand Coulee Dam. The most unforgettable place we spent a night was in Wyoming. We couldn't find a motel and ended up in a primitive cabin with 2 twin beds. And remember, we were on our honeymoon. We took off the bedding from one bed and used it for curtains. No bathroom or running water, just a pan and pitcher of water. When Mother Nature called, we just went outdoors. Later, when we had our pictures developed, we saw an old-fashioned pot on the porch. We arrived back in Hillsboro only to find that our small apartment, owned by the college, still had all the remnants left behind by men students who had lived there. It took a while to clean up inches of grease on the stove, and we painted and wallpapered. It was a challenge for newlyweds. At one point I was unhappy about something, and I can't remember what, and I became very quiet. Clarence kept asking me what was the matter, and I kept saying, "Nothing." He started jumping up and down and clapping his hands, and then said, "Oh, goody, goody, we're going to have our first fight." I couldn't help but laugh. On September 6th, I started my teaching job. I loved my job, including keeping the coal furnace running. I felt like a mother hen with 7 chicks. I sewed shirts for them and one for myself, took part in parades, and gave programs for the parents. Clarence was a senior. In the spring, the senior class, with a little help from others, put on the musical Pirates of Penzance. It was an exciting experience for both of us. I had been in an operetta in 9th grade and a junior class play in high school, but this was the most fun, even though I had to rush home for rehearsals after teaching all day. In the summer, we moved to Lawrence, Kansas, where Clarence started working on his master's degree. I taught 34 3rd and 4th graders at Vinland School. What a change from my other years of experience. The first 6 weeks, my class shared the gym with the 5th and 6th graders while the new building was being finished. A real challenge, but we all survived. But I almost didn't survive our second Christmas together. I wanted a buttonhole maker for my sewing machine. What Clarence gave me was a rock, wrapped and heavy like a buttonhole maker. I wasn't sure I appreciated his sense of humor. Well, with only a 60-hour teaching certificate, I couldn't teach anymore. So I worked at the circulation desk in the Kansas University Library. One day I looked up from behind the desk and saw the belt of a student. It happened to be Wilt Chamberlain, so I know he checked out at least one book that year. Clarence graduated with his master's on June 4, 1957. We moved back to Hillsboro, Kansas, where Clarence now had his first teaching job. And guess where? Yep, Tabor College. 6 days later, our son Douglas was born. 16 months later, October 1958, Dwayne joined the family. Clarence wanted to go back to school for his doctorate, so we packed up our stuff and moved to Minneapolis, Minnesota, September 1959. To help with finances, I tried my luck selling Tupperware, but decided selling just wasn't one of my talents at all. Neither was being a telemarketer for Traficante School of Music, offering guitar lessons. After 2 years in Minneapolis, Clarence finished the classes for his PhD, and back to Hillsboro we went. We bought our first house. Our son David was born in September 1962. Life in Hillsboro was busy. In 1965, we helped build a house. We wanted a sister for the boys, so we adopted 4-month-old Danette, born August 2, 1965. For 5 years, I taught violin with as many as 18 students, including our son Douglas. In the spring of 1969, we made 2 life-changing choices. We wanted to adopt a sister for Danette, and we wanted to leave Hillsboro. A job opened up for Clarence at Westminster, so once again we packed our stuff, had most of it shipped to Two Gateway Road in New Wilmington, and then spent the summer at a biological station in Lake Texoma, Oklahoma. We were there barely a week when we got a call from Social Services in Kansas that they had a 5-month-old baby girl for us. What a thrill to introduce our newest member, Debbie, born January 27, 1969, to our friends at the biology station. The Gateway house was small for a family of 7, so a much larger house was purchased on West Neshannock. After extensive remodeling, it became our home for 15 years. In 1985, we purchased our present house on Beechwood Road. Chapter 3. Do you have a degree? Job? When Debbie started kindergarten, I decided to go back to college and get a degree. I wanted to major in Christian education at Westminster, but changed my mind when I realized there just weren't any jobs close by. Still raising 5 kids, I didn't really want to teach school again, so after taking Spanish and a ceramics course, I decided to major in art. I loved working in clay. In 1978, Clarence was on sabbatical leave and had the grant to study in St. Croix, Virgin Islands. He had been there with students and knew there was a potter on the island. I contacted him, Conrad Knowles, and set up a work-study course where I would work in his studio and get credit from Westminster. Conrad was doing something so different, mostly hand building and pressing flowers into clay. I learned his techniques and how to run a business. I made many items for his business, and some to take back to New Wilmington. When we returned, as part of receiving credit for a ceramics course, I had to make a display of my pottery at the college. People started asking me if I could make some to sell. I saw possibilities of starting my own business, which I did after I graduated in 1979. I named my business Clay Creations by Mary Ann. For 23 years, I kept busy making pottery and selling it from my home, the college bookstore, Good Earth Gallery in Volant, Cook Forest, Coughlin Museum in Kansas, where all of their items had to have Kansas wheat in them, New York, the Hoyt Institute, and Sitka, Alaska. In the summers, I would set up my tent at various locations for different shows. In February, I sold my pottery at Penn Woods West Art Show in Mercer. In the 80s, I entered numerous juried art shows in Youngstown, Greenville, and in Westminster's Alumni and Faculty Art Show. The first and most memorable was titled Entropy. I had an overfiring in an old kiln and ruined just about every piece of pottery, and the kill shelves. I figured there had to be something I could do with the damaged pottery and kill shelves. I found an old set of wooden shelves and an old table, lined up good bells on the top shelf, slightly damaged bells on the second shelf. By the time I got to the bottom shelf and tabletop, the bells were just broken, dark brown pieces, going from good to bad. Entropy! I won second prize for that entry. Another prize winner was my unofficial trash can of the 1984 Olympics, made inside a 55-gallon barrel. I also entered one titled, Give Us This Day Our Daily Bread. I had several businesses that placed large orders. The largest was the National Holstein Convention that placed an order for 1,200 cowbells, all with Kansas wheat and field plants. It took several months to make them and ship them to Kansas. As much as I liked my clay business, I decided that enough was enough. There were other interests, like scrapbooking and quilting, that I wanted to enjoy. In the spring of 2003, Clarence retired from teaching and I retired from clay work. But do we ever really retire? Do we ever quit being a wife, a mother, a grandmother? Do we ever stop traveling or learning something new? Chapter 4. Here, There, Everywhere. Train, Boat, Plane. From age 3 until the present, I have done a lot of traveling. I have been to all states except Vermont and New Hampshire. We have traveled with campers and tents, by train, and by plane. We have spent summers at Lake Itasca, Minnesota, Friday Harbor, Washington, and Lake Texoma, Oklahoma. For our 40th anniversary, we took our 5 kids, 3 in-laws, and 8 grandkids to Colorado for 10 days, touring Pikes Peak, the Manitou Cliff Dwelling Museum, Cave of the Winds, and the Garden of the Gods, to name a few. For our 50th anniversary, our family, now several members larger, enjoyed a week at Cancun, Mexico. I don't find flying enjoyable, but the family fun and relaxation was more than enjoyable. Swimming in the pool or ocean, sunbathing on the beach, terrific meals, and a day trip to Chichen Itza, the old Mayan ruins, were highlights, especially watching most of the family climb up and down the steps of the Great Pyramid. Wonder where we'll go for our 60th. Ecuador is on the agenda for 2 weeks in 1999. Clarence took a tour group and I went along. Shopping in the big markets in Quito and Otavalo was memorable. Standing with one foot on each side of the equator was interesting, but the most exciting and educational days were spent living on a boat and experiencing the Galapagos Islands. We visited 8 islands, each different. Some were rocky, some sandy, some with green plants, some with cactus. The islands are clean, no trash. The animals are not afraid of humans. Blue-footed boobies were abundant, as were all kinds of birds. Various species of iguanas were on several islands. We could lay on the sand with the sea lions, send letters home at the International Post Office. We also spent time at the Darwin Research Station, interacting with huge turtles and seeing the baby turtles being raised. Each day we were in wonder of God's beautiful world. Beside many short trips, we spent a semester at 2 different places when Clarence was on sabbaticals. St. Croix Virgin Islands in 1978, which included our 3 youngest kids, and a few days were spent in Puerto Rico on the return trip, and another sabbatical in Sitka, Alaska in 1999. In Sitka, Clarence held a teaching position at Sheldon Jackson College. 2 highlights were the making and raising of a totem pole and watching salmon try to make it upstream. I called those salmon dumb because they just kept trying and trying and they never got anywhere. It rained just about every day, but I kept busy in the art department, showing the students how to make my style of pottery. I also enjoyed several art shows and felt it an honor to put some of my pieces on display. There were many evenings programs in town which often had dances by native Indians. Singing in the church choir and playing violin for the high school production of Oklahoma kept me busy. It was hard saying goodbye to the new friends we had made. The sunset on the ferry ride back to Bellingham, Washington, and then by car to Portland to spend Christmas and New Year with David and family before heading back home made leaving a little easier. The longest trip and the most changing and challenging was the 11 months we lived in Pakistan in 1988-89. Clarence had a Fulbright scholarship to do research on fish at the National Institute of Oceanography, located on the ocean edge in Karachi, a city then of 12 million. Remember, we came from small New Wilmington. Our apartment building, one of about 60, was only a half block from the ocean. We were in a lower upper class neighborhood. Close to our front yard was one of many garbage bins where animals and people foraged for throwaway food scraps and other wastes. The people living behind us lived out in the open. Some even less fortunate lived on the narrow strip between streets. Benazir Bhutto lived in a mansion not far away from us. We were there for the political election when Benazir's Pakistan People's Party, represented by an arrow, came into power. There were all kinds of processions and banners everywhere. After the election, Clarence got on top of our car and cut down a banner for a keepsake. There were many places along back streets where pottery was sold. Every now and then we'd find a person making pottery. There were also shops where the finished pieces could be sold. I even tried to try my luck attempting to throw a piece on the potter's wheel that was positioned in the ground near a refugee camp on the Afghanistan border. The clay was full of leaves and dirt, and I never could get that pot finished and pulling it up all the way. But I had a big audience. I took a class to learn about Oriental carpets. A dealer called a carpet walla came to our apartment every week, leaving 2 to 4 carpets. I ended up buying one from Persia, now known as Iran. If you remember, the U.S. government had an embargo on Iranian goods, but we got that carpet back to New Wilmington. There were also many carpet stores where we purchased several others. As part of the course, the class took a trip to watch young men and boys make carpets. How extremely sad. The carpets were washed and then dried on the dirty roadsides. I was glad to be involved in the International Church, but I still can't believe that I said yes to leading the choir. We sang each Sunday and also at community services. I was in a violin trio that often played in church and various other places. The Easter sunrise service on the beach was extra meaningful. One Sunday, we were invited to take part in a Pakistan Christian church service held in a Christian compound. We joined them in singing some choruses in English. We were asked to sit in the front, and Clarence made some remarks. We didn't understand the sermon, preached in Urdu. Several of the International Church members owned a cottage on a beach outside of Karachi. We had the use of the cottage several weekends a month. Camels and cobras were common on the beach. We watched sea turtles laying their eggs. Much time was spent just relaxing. We were guests of many Pakistani families, mostly Muslim, since 98% of the population is Muslim. The Kaifi family was especially appreciated. Mr. Kaifi, well known and wealthy, helped us purchase a car and also got us out of several parking situations. We attended his daughter Sana's high school graduation, where we also met his wife and other family members. His oldest daughter Sadaf was a student at Westminster. She came home for Sana's graduation. They took us bunderboating, a new fun experience for me. We were also guests of some very poor families with limited kitchen space. Fortunately, we never got sick from eating food. We became good friends with a young Pakistani Christian named Bashir Massey. He wanted to be our houseboy or servant and learn to speak English. Most Americans had many servants, but we wanted friends, not servants. So we enrolled him in a class at the Pakistan American Culture Center to learn English. With a little help from me, we hired him to cut our grass and become close friends. For his 20th birthday, we took him and 2 of his friends, Job and John, to a fancy American restaurant and then to our home for birthday cake, games, and gifts. We were invited to his 2-room house in a Christian compound several times, always enjoying the fellowship of his family. The family had no car or even a bicycle, so we gave Bashir a bicycle for Christmas. We attended several weddings, including one Christian wedding, a friend of Bashir's. Time was spent, especially holidays, with folks from various countries. David and Annette came to spend Christmas with us. We had sort of a Charlie Brown Christmas tree. On the 25th, we gave our backyard friends some blankets and some toys for the children. We told two of our Muslim friends the Christmas story and asked them to repeat it in Urdu to our backyard friends so they would know why we gave them gifts. In the spring, my special brother Irvin and his wife joined us to travel to northern Pakistan and its border with China. We traveled to many cities. Each city we visited, I bought fabric that was unique to that area. Why? Because I decided before we left New Wilmington that I would have time to learn how to piece a quilt and then how to quilt it. I purchased pattern books before leaving New Wilmington. I decided to practice by making 9-block wall hangings. I made every stitch by hand. I needed quilting thread, and not knowing exactly what it was, I purchased some in a small sewing shop. I found out later that it was almost as thick as string. I used a round hoop for quilting and not a quilting frame. I was pleased with the 2 wall hangings and showed one to my backyard friends. I also made blocks for a full-size quilt, which I put together by hand and quilted when we got back to New Wilmington. In February 1992, I entered my quilt in the Penwoods West Art Show and won first place in the full-size quilt category and second in Best of Show. Well, maybe it was just the opposite, but I did earn 2 ribbons. I purchased a quilting frame with the prize money. In June, my quilt was in the Westminster Quilt Show. I've made 2 other quilts, one quilted on the quilt frame. In September 1993, I felt honored to be asked by the Hoyt Institute of Fine Arts to exhibit my quilt as well as items we had purchased in Pakistan. The exhibit was called Pakistani Memories and was open from September 7th to 30th. There was a reception and gallery talk on the 10th. The exhibit showed many articles, clothing including a wedding dress and groom suit, pottery, games and jewelry, metalware, carpet wall hangings, paintings, baskets, and an embroidered mirror door hanging, all precious memories of 11 months spent in Pakistan. After leaving Pakistan for home, we spent several days as tourists in Paris and London. Of course, we had to see the Eiffel Tower and the Louvre in Paris, where I took an illegal picture of the Mona Lisa. And we ate at the first McDonald's we had seen in 11 months. In London, I sat with others in Piccadilly Circle, watched the birds in Trafalgar Square, the soldiers at Buckingham Palace, and toured Westminster Abbey. When we arrived back home with family and friends waiting for us, I was overwhelmed. My first words were, "How can we justify living like this?" Our lives were truly changed. The last country we visited was the Bahamas. Last January, we took my favorite means of transportation, the train, to Jacksonville, Florida, and boarded one of the Carnival ships for a 5-day cruise with Dwayne and family to celebrate their 25th wedding anniversary. That was first class, fun, and relaxing. A real change from tenting. The cruise also took us to the Florida Keys. In July, we flew to Portland, Oregon to be part of David's wedding, and after the wedding, we had the privilege of staying with their 3 girls for several days and getting to know our newest grandchild. I feel blessed to have had such an adventurous 74 years. With God's help, perhaps I'll have enough new experiences to write another book.